My name is Beverly Baker. I'm 63 years old, and for the past 8 years I've run a private chef and catering service in Millbrook, Ohio, cooking for corporate events, private dinner parties, and a client list that includes 2 county judges and the owner of the largest car dealership group in the region. That's the credibility. Here's the part that still doesn't sit right in my chest. For nearly 2 decades, my own family treated me like an unpaid maid at every single gathering, and my revenge left every one of them cooking for themselves. I want to tell you exactly what happened at last year's Thanksgiving, because it was the day everything finally changed. I had spent 3 full days preparing dinner for 14 people, the way I had every single year for 18 years. And as I carried the last serving dish to the table, my sister-in-law, Janet, looked up from her phone and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Beverly, the gravy's a little thin this year. Also, you missed a spot clearing the appetizer plates." Not thank you. Not this looks incredible. A complaint about gravy, and a reminder that, in this family's eyes, I wasn't the woman who built the meal. I was the staff. But here's what Janet didn't know yet. Sitting there scrolling her phone while I stood holding a serving dish I'd been up since 5 a.m. preparing. 3 weeks earlier, I had signed a contract to cater a 200-person corporate holiday gala on the exact date of the family's Christmas gathering, a booking worth $14,000, the largest single contract of my career. And 1 month later, my entire family would sit down at a Christmas table with no turkey, no sides, no pies, and no Beverly, staring at each other over store-bought rotisserie chicken, finally understanding exactly what I had been worth to them all along. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all really started. If you're watching this tonight and something about it already feels a little too familiar, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now for you. I read every single comment. I grew up in a big family outside Dayton, Ohio, the second of 5 children and the oldest daughter, which in my family meant I was cooking full dinners for 7 people by the time I was 11 years old. My mother worked evening shifts at a hospital laundry, coming home past 10 most nights smelling of industrial detergent and steam, and the kitchen became mine by default, not by choice. I learned to stretch a pound of ground beef across 2 meals, to turn Sunday's chicken carcass into Monday's soup, to time 4 dishes to finish at the same moment on a stove with 1 unreliable burner. But somewhere between the obligation and the exhaustion, I discovered something unexpected. I was good at it. Genuinely good. Not just capable, gifted, in the way some people are gifted with music or numbers. By 16, neighbors were paying me to bake for their church events. By 18, I'd won the county fair pie competition 2 years running, and the second year, the judge, a retired restaurant owner, pulled me aside and told me I had professional hands, a phrase I carried quietly with me for the next 40 years. I married my husband, Thomas Baker, in 1984, a good man who drove a delivery truck for 31 years and never once treated my cooking as anything less than a gift. Every single evening, no matter how tired he was, Thomas said thank you for dinner. Every single evening for 30 years. It sounds like a small thing, but I've learned since exactly how rare that small thing is. We raised 2 children, my son Gregory and my daughter Melissa, in a small house where the kitchen was the heart of everything. Homework at the counter, birthday cakes from scratch, Sunday dinners that neighbors found excuses to drop by for. Thomas passed away from a stroke in 2014, on a Sunday morning at 8:20 a.m., while I was making his breakfast, his coffee still warming on the counter when the paramedics arrived. He was 58. After he was gone, cooking for people became the way I held myself together, the one thing that still made sense when nothing else did, my hand staying steady over a cutting board, even on the days the rest of me wasn't steady at all. That was also when the family gatherings changed. My brother Raymond and his wife Janet started hosting holidays at their large house in Ashford Hills, and somewhere along the way, an unspoken arrangement formed. Their house, my labor. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every Easter, every birthday I cooked. Not helped cook. Cooked. All of it. I'd arrive 2 days early with coolers of prepped ingredients, spend the holiday itself standing at Janet's stove while everyone else watched football and drank wine, serve the meal, clear the table, wash the dishes, and drive home exhausted while the family group chat filled with photos of a table I'd built and wasn't in a single picture of. I remember specific holidays, the way you remember old injuries. Thanksgiving 2017, When I cooked with a fever of 101 because Janet said moving the gathering would ruin everyone's plans, and nobody once asked why I kept sitting down between dishes. Christmas 2019, when I spent so long plating and serving that by the time I fixed my own plate, the table was already clearing and Raymond asked if I could get started on the dishes since I was up anyway. Easter 2021, when my daughter Melissa, who lives out of state and only sees the family a few times a year, pulled me aside in the kitchen and said quietly, "Mom, why are you the only one working?" And I gave her some answer about enjoying it that neither of us believed. If any part of this is landing close to home for you, go ahead and drop a comment. I read every single one. For years, I told myself it was love. And partly it was, I do love feeding people. It's the deepest language I speak. But love given freely and labor quietly assigned are two different things, and the difference showed itself in 100 small moments I kept choosing to overlook. Janet introducing me to her friends as the family cook, we'd starve without her, with a little laugh that wasn't entirely a joke. Raymond handing me his empty plate without looking up from the television, the way you'd hand something to a passing waiter. My own son Gregory, who I love dearly, developing the habit of texting me grocery lists before holidays, lists of what everyone wanted me to make, complete with modifications. Janet wants the stuffing without mushrooms this year, as though I were taking orders at a restaurant counter. Nobody ever offered to pay for the groceries, which ran $400 to $600 per holiday out of my own pocket, over $10,000 across 18 years by my own conservative math, a figure I once calculated on the back of a receipt and then folded away without showing anyone. Nobody ever offered to help with dishes beyond a token plate or two carried to the counter and abandoned there. And in 18 years, not one person ever asked the question that would have changed everything. "Beverly, what would you like to do this holiday?" Nobody asked because the answer was assumed. Beverly cooks. That's what Beverly is for. Meanwhile, something else was growing that my family paid no attention to whatsoever. After Thomas passed, a neighbor asked me to cater her daughter's engagement party, 40 guests, and insisted on paying me properly, pressing a check into my hand at the end of the night and saying, "Beverly, this is professional work, and it deserves professional pay." I cried in my car in her driveway, not because of the amount, but because it was the first time in my adult life anyone had put a dollar figure on something I had been giving away for free since I was 11 years old. I sat there for 10 minutes, holding that check, thinking about my mother coming home at 10 at night from the hospital laundry, and about all the women in my family who had cooked for crowds their whole lives without a single person ever suggesting the work was worth money. That engagement party changed the direction of my entire life, though I didn't know it at the time. 3 guests from that party called me within the month. One wanted a retirement dinner catered. One wanted her book club's annual luncheon. One, a paralegal, mentioned me to the judge she worked for, and that single mention eventually became my most valuable client relationship. Word spread the way it does when food is genuinely good. Within 2 years, I had a licensed home kitchen, a business name, Beverly's Table, and a steady calendar of private dinners and corporate events. Within 5 years, I was turning down more work than I accepted. 2 county judges became regular clients, one of whom told me my braised short ribs were the reason he scheduled his chamber's annual dinner around my availability. The owner of the region's largest car dealership group booked me for every quarterly executive dinner and referred me to half his golf club. By last year, Beverly's Table was earning $160,000 annually, and I had hired 2 part-time assistants, both culinary students from the community college, both of whom said thank you more times in an average shift than my family had in the previous decade. My family knew about the business in the vaguest possible way. "Beverly does her little catering thing," Janet would say, in the same tone you describe someone's scrapbooking hobby. Nobody ever asked how it was going. Nobody ever asked what I charged, who my clients were, or why my weekends kept getting busier. The same people who ordered me around their kitchen every holiday had no idea that businesses across 3 counties were paying premium rates for the exact labor they'd been extracting from me for free for 18 years. Last Thanksgiving was the breaking point, though I didn't make a scene, because that has never been my way. 3 days of preparation, starting Tuesday morning with the brines and the pie doughs. 14 people. An 11-dish spread including 2 turkeys because Raymond insists on both roasted and smoked, which means 2 entirely different cooking timelines, manage simultaneously in a kitchen that isn't mine. I was up at 5 a.m. Thanksgiving morning. By the time dinner was served at 3 p.m., I had been on my feet for 10 hours, and the only interaction anyone had offered me all day was Janet walking through the kitchen twice to ask, "How much longer?" and Raymond calling out from the living room to ask if there were more of those little sausage things. And as I set down the final dish, Janet, without looking up from her phone, delivered her review. "Beverly, the gravy's a little thin this year. Also, you missed a spot clearing the appetizer plates." I stood there for a moment, still holding the sweet potato casserole, and I looked around that table. Really looked, maybe for the first time in years. 14 people. Not one of them had stood up to help carry a single dish. Not one had said thank you. Raymond was already reaching across the table with his fork before everyone was even seated. My granddaughter, Chloe, 16 years old, was the only one who even looked uncomfortable, glancing between me and Janet with an expression that told me she saw exactly what I saw and had maybe been seeing it for a while. I set the casserole down, smiled, and said, "I'll look into that gravy, Janet." And I made a decision, standing right there in the steam and the noise of a table full of people eating food they hadn't lifted a finger for, that I'd been 18 years too slow to make. 3 weeks earlier, a longtime corporate client had asked me to cater their 200-person holiday gala on December 25th itself, the exact date of the family Christmas gathering. The contract was worth $14,000, the largest single booking of my career. I had been hesitating, planning to turn it down the way I'd quietly turned down holiday-adjacent work for years, protecting a family tradition that treated me as staff. I'd actually drafted the polite decline email twice, both times closing my laptop without sending it, something in me refusing, for the first time, to finish the sentence. "Unfortunately, I have a family commitment that day." Standing at that Thanksgiving table with Janet's gravy critique hanging in the air, I stopped hesitating. I drove home that night, and before I even unpacked my coolers, before I even took off my shoes, I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter, deleted the decline draft, and emailed the client and signed the contract. It took less than 4 minutes. 18 years, and then 4 minutes. I didn't tell my family for 2 weeks. When I finally announced it in the group chat, politely, simply, "I won't be able to cook for Christmas this year. I've accepted a major catering contract for that date. You'll need to make other arrangements," the response was genuine, unfiltered panic. Raymond called within 10 minutes, not to congratulate me, but to ask, in complete seriousness, "Well then, who's going to make Christmas dinner?" Not congratulations on the contract. Not what's the event. Just the immediate, reflexive question of who would replace the service they'd lost. Janet sent a long message about how disappointing it was that I would abandon family tradition for money. A sentence I read 4 times, marveling at the word tradition being used to describe 18 years of my unpaid labor. My son Gregory, to his partial credit, at least asked what the contract was before asking whether I could maybe prep some dishes in advance for them to reheat. I said no, to all of it, kindly, calmly, and completely. No advance prep, no dropped-off pies, no recipes texted over with instructions. I told them, plainly, that after 18 years, they had every resource they needed to make a holiday dinner: working kitchens, grocery stores, the internet, and 13 able-bodied adults. What they had never had was a reason to try, because I had always been the reason they didn't have to. Christmas Day, I catered the most successful event of my career. 200 guests, a 12-item menu, a client so thrilled they booked me on the spot for 3 more events and referred me to 2 other companies. My assistants and I worked a 12-hour day, starting at 6 a.m. in my kitchen and ending near midnight breaking down the last serving stations, and I have never felt more valued in my professional life. The event ran flawlessly, the beef tenderloin carved perfectly, the dessert display drawing a small crowd of guests taking photos, the client's event coordinator finding me mid-service just to say the food was the best their company had served in 15 years of galas. That evening, the client CEO stood up in front of 200 people, raised his glass, and asked the room to give Chef Beverly and her team a round of applause. 200 strangers clapped for me, some of them standing. I stood at the edge of that ballroom in my chef's coat, and I'll admit it plainly, my eyes filled. In 18 years of family holidays, I had never once been thanked in front of the table. The family Christmas, I heard all about afterward, mostly from Chloe, who narrated the entire disaster to me over the phone with the barely contained delight only a 16-year-old can manage. They attempted a turkey that came out raw in the center and burned on the outside because nobody realized it needed to thaw for 3 days first. It went into the oven still frozen in the middle. Janet's mashed potatoes were, in Chloe's words, like glue you could chew. The green bean casserole was forgotten in the oven entirely and set off the smoke alarm. By 4 p.m., they gave up and Raymond drove to the only open grocery store and bought 4 rotisserie chickens and a bag of dinner rolls. 14 people sat around a table eating store-bought chicken off the good china, and according to Chloe, the meal was mostly silent until my youngest brother finally said out loud what apparently everyone was thinking. "We never even said thank you to her, did we?" Chloe told me nobody answered him. The silence, she said, lasted a full minute. The apologies came slowly and unevenly over the weeks that followed. Gregory came by in early January and apologized properly, not for the ruined dinner, but for the grocery lists for the 18 years, for never once asking whether I wanted to spend my holidays working. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework as a boy, and said, "Mom, I watched Dad thank you every single night, and somehow I still grew up into someone who texted you orders. I don't know how I let that happen. That one meant something, and I told him so. We've had dinner together, just the two of us, once a month since, and he cooks half of it, badly but sincerely, and I have never enjoyed mediocre pasta more in my life." My daughter Melissa called from out of state the day after Christmas and said just one thing before anything else. "Mom, it's about time." She'd apparently been waiting years for me to stop, never feeling it was her place to force the issue from a distance, and she told me the story of that kitchen conversation at Easter 2021 had stayed with her ever since, the answer I gave that neither of us believed. She flew home for a weekend in March, and we cooked together, just the two of us, for no audience and no holiday, a lasagna from my mother's old recipe, and it was the first time in years that cooking with family felt like what it was always supposed to be, company, not service. She washed every dish afterward and wouldn't let me near the sink, and we both laughed at how strange that felt, and then we both got a little quiet, because underneath the laughing we both knew exactly why it felt strange. Raymond's apology was clumsier, half apology and half negotiation, ending with him asking whether I'd consider coming back for Easter if the family chipped in for groceries this time. I told him I'd consider attending Easter, as a guest, with a bottle of wine in my hand and not a single dish to my name, and that Beverly's table charges $85 per person for private holiday catering if they'd like to hire a professional. He thought I was joking. I was not joking. He actually called back 2 days later to ask if there was a family discount. I told him the family rate was $85 per person, same as everyone else, because family, as I'd recently learned, is precisely who should be paying full price for labor they'd spent 18 years assuming was free. He didn't book me, for the record. Nobody in the family has. And honestly, that tells its own quiet little story, too. Janet never apologized directly. What she did instead, which I've come to understand is the closest thing to an apology her pride allows, was send me a photograph in February of a pot roast she'd made, with the message, "Used your onion trick. Turned out pretty good." I wrote back, "Looks great, Janet," and meant it mostly. Some relationships don't transform. Some just settle into a more honest shape, and that's enough. She also, notably, has started saying thank you at gatherings now, a little stiffly, a little formally, like a phrase in a foreign language she's still practicing, but she says it every time, and I've decided that counts. This past Easter, for the first time in 18 years, I attended a family gathering as a guest. I arrived at 2 p.m. like everyone else, carrying nothing but a bottle of wine and a small bouquet for the table. I'll admit it felt physically strange walking past that kitchen without turning into it, like a magnet losing its pull after 18 years. Janet cooked, with help from 2 of my sisters-in-law, and the food was honestly mediocre, the ham slightly dry, the rolls from a tube, and I say that with genuine warmth because mediocre food that I didn't have to cook tasted better than any feast I'd ever made for that family. I sat at the table the entire meal, from the first bite to the last. I was in the photographs, actually in them, sitting down, holding a wine glass, smiling. Chloe sat next to me and asked question after question about the catering business, about how I built it, about whether she could work summers for me, and I said yes to that faster than I've said yes to anything in years. She starts in June. I'm paying her properly, of course. That's the whole point. Here's what I want you to take away from tonight, in my own words, because I earned the right to say this plainly after 18 years of unpaid holidays and one Christmas that changed everything. The people who take your labor for granted are counting on one thing above all, that you'll never stop volunteering it. The moment you do, they don't just lose a free service. They're forced to finally see the person who was providing it. You are allowed to stop being the staff in your own family. You are allowed to charge full price for what you're worth, even to people who share your name. And you are allowed to sit at the table. I think, sometimes, about that judge at the county fair 45 years ago telling an 18-year-old girl she had professional hands. It took me 4 decades and one silent Christmas table to fully believe him. My hands haven't changed. What changed is that I finally stopped giving away, for free and without thanks, the exact thing the rest of the world had been trying to pay me for all along. Chloe asked me recently, while we were prepping for a spring luncheon, whether I regretted waiting so long to stop. I told her the truth. Yes, a little. But a lesson learned at 63 still counts, and the years I have left will be spent at the table, not standing behind it. Beverly's table, meanwhile, has had its best year ever. The Christmas gala led directly to 5 new corporate contracts, and I raised my rates in the spring for the first time in 3 years. Nobody blinked. I've started teaching a monthly cooking class at the community center, mostly older women, several of whom, I've noticed, tell versions of my same story during our chats over the stove. Decades of family meals, vanishing thanks, the slow discovery that the work they've been giving away was worth something all along. I always tell them what I'll tell you now. Your labor doesn't become valuable when someone finally pays for it. It was valuable the entire time. The payment just makes it visible. If this story meant something to you tonight, hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me which part hit hardest, and share this with someone who spends every holiday standing at a stove while everyone else sits down. They need to hear this more than anyone. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves out there.